This week on Super Neat Show, Zion,
Mars Hill,
and It Will Kill.
Welcome to Super Neat Show. This is episode 8.
Oh, what's up with your mug?
So check it out. I've got this Sprinkler World Classic, and we got that as a gift slash present. I think this was around Christmas, maybe 2 years ago, and they just brought in...
So it's basically an antique.
You know, that's right. They brought in this big gift basket, and each of these mugs were filled up with, a bunch of little goodies to include, but not limited to, pens and hot cocoa, and even a little magnet slash Phillips head screwdriver. Because why not?
Sweet.
Naturally, we ate all the goodies, and it's like, well, what do we do with these mugs? I guess save them for later.
I know. That's cool.
Tell me about your mug.
I was sporting ye old Dixie portable cup because I'm going camping after this.
Hey-oh. Heading on a road trip.
Heading on a road trip.
Gonna be drinking lots of coffee. Man, that's way better than the original. Recent Google searches.
Raising Cane's menu. You?
That was it?
That's it.
The only thing worthy of a Google search. So I looked up a few things that are very important. One was Dairy Queen. Naturally.
I see.
I didn't wind up going, but I just wanted to look it up anyway. Also looked up Chick-fil-A coffee. Shout out to Chick-fil-A.
What's up?
And then car washes. Was that the Cadbury Bunny?
Definitely.
I'm like, why is that rabbit sound like a chicken?
Recently.
Forget about a chicken sandwich, it's a chocolate egg sandwich.
Yeah, Peter Cotton tailgating party. You got $5 word today?
Yes. Disaggrandizement. So you all are familiar with aggrandizement, of course.
Obviously.
Naturally. Which is...
I just had some for breakfast.
100 grandizement. The most epic candy bar in the world. Yeah. So aggrandizement is basically to glorify or to bring special attention and lofty opinion toward. So disaggrandizement, of course, would be the opposite of that. And if you wanted to say, I suppose depending on the type of speech, you could say to be disaggrandized would almost be to say that you have been humbled. Would be another kind of similar...
Put in your place. So what made you smile this week?
Well, mostly Macbeth and the Cadbury Bunny breakfast bars. But also, we picked up the first time in a while on Saturday and had the breakfast club with the youth, and that's pretty cool. It's basically just an opportunity. It's a little bit less formal for the students that are interested to meet up and kind of emphasize the topic of leadership or subject of leadership.
Went hiking this week in Zion National Park. Magical place. And it was a fun hike. We did a lot of walking in water and found some new muscles. We were watching TV in our room because that's what you do when you're on a hiking trip. There's a show on the History Channel I'd never heard of before called Forged in Fire. Have you seen this? So it's like a reality show for bladesmiths where they go up against each other and make knives out of like monkey wrenches or whatever's laying around. It's pretty cool. And then they put them through these different rigorous tests and as they create these things, and they have a weapons expert that does some testing on stuff. Such as, will it slice and will it kill?
Will it dice?
Well, no, it's like, will it kill? And they put it up against a dummy. And every time he would get this creepy smile on his face. It would be like, it will kill.
It will kill. It will kill. This will kill. This will kill. It's a killer. It will kill.
It will kill.
Anyway, ridiculous. He did seem rather excited about that.
Got a superhero of the faith this week?
I was talking with Mom over the weekend, and she reminded me of a really good one. Esther.
Oh yeah, that girl.
That girl. She started off being just a bunny lass. Yeah, so she gets exalted and basically becomes the queen. Basically, Esther has to use the position, the privilege that she's been given, and use that as an opportunity to stand up and present herself before the king in order to ultimately save the Israelite nation, which is pretty cool. So,
And she went from being a mere bonny lass
to a great bonny lass. It will cut.
It will kill.
profundity.
Whoa!
Last week, which was technically this week. Sorry about that.
Hey, technical difficulties. What? So last week we talked about this concept of the kingdom is in you, and there's kind of this nice metaphor about Gatorade, is it in you? And a lot of the times I think as Christians or even just general folks who call themselves Christ followers, we can fall into this trap of thinking that the kingdom is an accessory and it's simply something that we keep with us, or we ask Jesus to go with us about our day. And he's a lot more interested in taking up residence within us and leading and guiding from the inside, internally. And as we go forward, I think his Great Commission is fulfilled in us, that where we go, the kingdom is going. Even within Jesus' own life and ministry, you get this picture that the kingdom, it's the good news, the gospel, it's not just for a small select group of people. Jesus in his own ministry, he shared and ministered and interacted with everybody. He interacted with children and with adults, with his friends, his inner circle. He also interacted with religious leadership and sinners and prostitutes and tax collectors and the Samaritan woman at the well, with foreigners, even with political leaders, with Pilate. And the Roman centurion, and Jesus remarked, "I've never seen such great faith in all of Israel." It comes from this Roman centurion of all people. Mm-hmm. But I think it all ties together in John 3:16, where he said, "This is for everybody. It's not just for a certain select. It's so that all might have everlasting life." And of course, we referenced was it 2 Peter last week, and this picture again, just that he's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to life. And so I think a lot of the times as the church, as Christians, the challenge is not so much should we evangelize or should we good news, should we be bringing good news where we go, but the question tends to be more of where do we start? What are some practical tips?
Practical points. Jiggy jiggy wugga. Practical points. Jiggy jiggy wugga. Practical points. Jiggy jiggy wugga. Practical. It will kill. This last Sunday, I preached on Paul's famous sermon on Mars Hill to the Athenians. And we'll go ahead and link it below in case you want to give her a listen. Get a little more background on here. But Paul went to a foreign culture and engaged them in a way that I think we can learn a few evangelistic tips from. First, he went to them. He didn't wait for them to come to him. He engaged them where they were on their grounds and went to the center of their counsel and philosophy and thinking. And I'm reminded of verse 21 in Acts 17, it's just in parentheses, and it basically says the Athenians and foreigners that were living there basically did nothing but lay around all day thinking about and talking about the latest ideas. I'm like,
paradise.
Wow. And I thought our political climate had a running commentary. It's like, this is all these dudes did. But this is where the center of thought and philosophy was happening in that time. And Paul went there and engaged them where they were using their ideas. So that was one. He went to them. Number two, he set aside his own offenses and preferences. So verse 16 said that the city was full of idols, and to a first century Jew, there could have not been anything more disgusting or revolting than this idea. Mm-hmm. And so for him to go there to see all of these graven images made to false gods would have just been sickening. But he chose to set that aside to engage them where they were and to, for the sake of the gospel, but also to use what they understood. And then he points out the altars that he saw to an unknown God. Mm-hmm. And so So we see that Paul went to them. Paul set aside his own offenses and preferences. And then third, we see that Paul was a student of their culture. Okay, he sought to understand them. And then he actually pointed out, he says, okay, so I noticed on my way up Mars Hill that you have an altar to an unknown God. And when I used to read this, I kind of thought, and a lot of the sermons I've even heard, was that this unknown God was almost a catch-all. Like, okay, so you already have hundreds of gods, and then here's an altar to an unknown God, just in case we forgot something. But actually, when you look back at some of the historical and even mythological context, which was kind of intertwined in the Hellenistic culture, where Paul was standing, there was a significant event 600 years previous that would have led to these altars being created, and they actually look like they pointed more to one specific unknown God rather than just
as a catch-all.
Yeah, as a catch-all. And Paul was a student enough of that he ends up quoting that same philosopher who engaged in that 600 years before when he says in verse 28, in him we live and move and have our being. And that was Epimenides. And so he uses what they would have understood, what they would have been familiar with, and then he says, okay, this unknown God has a name, and let me tell you about this God. And so he takes what they understood and realized. So again, just recap, Paul went to them. Paul set aside his own offenses and preferences, and Paul was a student of their culture and sought to understand them.
That's really good. And I think those are all incredibly relevant tips that any of us can use and should apply to our own interaction. May you be known by love, a voice of hope,
as you walk by faith.
All of a sudden, this sounds like our mission statement.
1 Thessalonians 1.
Therefore, may you be known by love rather than what you're against. May you be a voice of hope rather than a voice of condemnation. And may you be salt and light where you are already engaged and influential in the world. And give us comments. Dang it, we want to interact with you. Post below and like the video and subscribe and tell your friends.
It will post.
It will kill.